Peter, could I ask you to mute until until you need to talk? We're just getting a bit of background noise from you.
That's Peter throwing stuff on the floor.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So welcome to the February office hours. For those of you who've not been on one of these sessions before, we try and do a mixture of things on these. We try and share some useful, valuable nuggets or assets from our team, our partners, our customers, and we really hope that that leads to good conversation. So if you've got questions, if you want to shout out and ask or speak, do that. If you want to put them in the chat, we will be trying to monitor that and make sure we answer those as well. So welcome. This month we are talking about using RESTman, and what we're actually going to do is kind of a bit of introduction to RESTman. I've seen a wide variety of skill set on these calls. So for some of you that may be an introduction you don't need, but we're going to do a quick RESTman introduction. We're then going to look at some tools that we have seen developed in the field. So a couple of those will come from myself. So some of those are pretty old because I've not been a hands-on field guy for a while, but hopefully you'll find them useful. And then J-Mac has got a couple of tools he's going to show. And if we have time, I think, Francois, you have one use case of using RESTman as well. And then once we get there, we want to also give you some kind of updates on RESTman, where we're going with it, what we're doing with it in the future. And, Francois, who we are delighted to have back in the fold, to use your term, Maurizio, has been working on a spike internally and can give you a kind of update of what we're doing with RESTman. And we have a couple of questions we'd like your feedback on. So that's the session. Feel free to be interactive and we'll get going. So, what is RESTman? Hopefully everybody knows it, but RESTman is our management service. Back in the day when SOAP was everything, we had a web services based management interface, but RESTman came out many years ago. You can, as the screen shows, you can use it as an API, so you can actually make calls remotely to the gateway, and you can use it in policy, and we'll talk about how we do that. But basically, if you want to use RESTman, you publish an internal service and get going. So how do we use it? Like I said, if you want to enable it as an external service, you go to Services APIs, publish internal service, and use RESTman. If you want to change the routing URL for some reason, you can do that, and you can actually run multiples of those if you want to. So that might be a reason for changing the routing URL. The instructions in the gray box downstairs are if you want to do this automatically. So you can use some of the capabilities we have to auto provision services. So you can go into the command line, however you get there, and touch these files, restart the gateway, and your RESTman service will be automatically published. So if you're doing an automated environment, that can be pretty useful.
See, there's a little error in that thing there, because you did make the -p touch space, and then that doesn't make sense, does it?
I copied that straight from the documentation, Vince. So okay. I think isn't -p because you're creating a directory?
Yeah.
You don't need it when you're creating the file.
There should probably be a semicolon after the P.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
It's okay.
Check the documentation.
Sorry.
And I just took that straight from there. I've always cut and paste. So once you deploy it as an API, this is the kind of default policy that gets built. So there's some protection in there and there's some security in there. And you'll say, regardless of whether you use this internally or externally, basically we have an assertion, which is the REST managed gateway assertion. And you'll see when we get to our samples that, that's the heart of everything. So yes, it requires a user to be authenticated. You can't use that assertion without it. It requires someone with the right access control to do that. And if you wanted to change this, have some sort of different authentication policy or auditing or that kind of thing, you can do that as long as you don't break any of those fundamentals that you have a authenticated user with admin access, and that's that. So if you wanted to make it unsecure, you could remove the SSL requirements and let people come in on port 8080 and open yourself up to all the headaches that you'd get from doing that. But If you want to make it more secure, this is kind of how you do it. You'd edit that original policy. Documentation. The documentation is, I've always been frustrated. The documentation is only available once you've accessed the, once you've enabled the RESTman API. So, you know, you can see here my gateway /RESTman1/doc/home HTML, and you can go in and you can look at the resources, and we'll have a look at that if we get time in a second. And you can also go in and look at the schema. So if you want to work out what sort of XML the XML should look like for sending a new request, a new push, etc., you can do that by going in there and looking at that schema. And we'll talk about some of the things that we're trying to do in RESTman 2 to make that easier and make it easier for you to use. And then how do you call RESTman? So externally, once that is up and running, like you can reach the documentation page, you can also make a call. I'll just show you a couple of calls in Postman in a second to make sure everyone's comfortable with that. If you're using it internally within a service, it's in the documentation, but I'll put it in here. You need to set a couple of variables before you get to the RESTman gateway assertion, and we'll look at these in the examples. But basically, you need to set the URI, so matching what would be at the top here, and you need to set the action, and you also need to set a message variable depending on what you're doing, and we'll cover that as well in the demo. So if I quickly switch to Postman, is that too small? Is it big enough now? Everyone see that?
It's getting better.
Okay. I normally have Greg on the
This
call
is good.
to keep me aware of my screen is too big for people who I'm sharing with. So, you know, just a few sample calls here. So if I want to get the listen ports, actually, let's just go full screen and be done with it. Hopefully that's, if I want to get the listen ports, this is where I'm going to, which I would get from the documentation. I'm sending a basic authentication header and I make that request, and you can see that the response comes back. So, you know, I can see everything about those listen ports. I've got an example here which will kind of set a theme for the first demo that we're going to do. You know, this is getting the cluster-wide properties, and you know, as a good URL based API should, this gives me a list of those things, and for each one of those it gives me an ID, right? And if I want to drill down and get some more information or just that particular cluster-wide property, I can then use that ID in a separate call to get that information. And that's how I would actually do an update as well. So in that case, I would do a put and I would put it in. We can share this collection afterwards. I would say that the tricky bit for me when I was first using it, doing the get and the put, there's a little bit of manipulation you need to do of the message between those two steps. So working out that you go down to this level from a response that gives you a whole host of other things is one of the first steps I would say making this useful. So RESTman's pretty powerful. We thought we'd show that by showing a few tools that we've built or ways we've used it. So if I come out of this and I connect to my policy manager, and I will zoom in on this when I've connected. 1 second. We're going to talk you through. Okay, so while that's connecting, I'll just show you what this is going to look like. This is just a reminder for myself. One of these sample policies I managed to upload earlier this morning. So it's actually in our Layer7 community GitHub repo. The first one, the other ones we will upload over the next few hours after the call. But the first tool I built this several years ago. It's for a customer who had a particular use case around managing cluster-wide properties and how they use them in a like a business rules engine, basically. And they wanted people to be able to change some of the rules without having to come in and log into Policy Manager. So this service that I've built on the gateway, goes in, it uses RESTman, and it enables us to, for instance, update this cluster. update this cluster-wide property by using the web interface. So you can see that's there. So as well as updating and deleting, it can also create new cluster-wide properties as well. I just put delete me in so that I remember and get rid of those things that I don't want. But you'll see now those new cluster-wide properties. So it was pretty useful for them. They were making, good use of policy. They had lots of things that they wanted to control, but they wanted to give, some sort of power to non-gateway users, if you like, non-administrators. So this was a way that we did that for them. We put some different access controls and stuff in place so they couldn't get to policy management, that kind of stuff. So if I go to my policy manager, which is hung brilliantly, I will show you the policy. Okay.
Don't you just love live demos?
Of course. Let's just restart the baby. Connect again. If this doesn't connect, oh, there we go. I was going to say, Jay, you're on board. You're on now if I have to go and restart anything or spin anything up in the background. So let me show you the policy. Now, I would say a lot of this policy is very simple. The more complex part when you first look at it is actually kind of building the web interface, right? So I will zoom in does that work? Do you see more zoomed in on the desktop?
Can't zoom in the policy manager.
No. Only if you've got something that zooms in Windows.
So
yeah, exactly.
Or
I'm
Mac.
zooming in my Mac Windows. Is that working?
No, it didn't do it.
Not
okay. It might do on yours, but not on this.
Well, on Linux you can.
Well, you can on the Mac, but it doesn't work on WebEx. WebEx doesn't pick the zoom up. So, okay. So
yeah.
hopefully you can see. Is it readable?
A little bit, yeah. If you put your face on the display, you can see.
Let me go and get my glasses.
Well, or you can zoom in your screen. Or, I mean, in the sense that
you can
zoom in on the client side.
Yeah, first bit, there's a few comments. Then, I tend to put things in an all assertions folder to keep them cleaner. I'm not a cluttery person when I'm building policy, or try not to be. So first of all, we're requiring basic HTTP credentials and authenticating identity provider. That's, pick the flavor that you want. The next bit is we set some variables. So this is basically the style sheet and the top of the web page that we're going to build. So, I'll just open one of those up to show you. It's basically where we're going to put the content of the web page when we build it. It's a fairly standard way. If you look at OTK and things like that, that's how we've built those web pages in the past. So they're the sort of first variables that we set up. And then there is how we deal with the 4 actions. So delete, create, update, and get. So if I start with the get, this is basically someone calling the web page without hitting one of those buttons. And I have a fragment because a lot of the code gets reused in this policy where I don't know if highlighting that helps you. So basically we set the URI string, right, for the gateway, the REST managed gateway assertion. So we set it to cluster properties, we set the action to get, and then we call the managed gateway assertion. And that gets us a whole list of those cluster properties that we need. And then we do some XSLT transformation. Now, pick your way of choice of changing XML into HTML, but I grew up working with data power, as Jay commented on when he first saw this slide. So everything I ever did for 10 years was in XSLT. So I did this in XSLT. It's a pretty simple bit of XSLT to build the web page up. So, the powerful bit here is that we're getting all those cluster-wide properties from one RESTman call, and then we're just displaying them in a web page. The delete, create, and update are all very similar, except when we make the call. So this is the update one. When we do the update one, we actually need the parameter, the cluster-wide property ID. So the web page sends us that, we capture that, and we manipulate the REST managed gateway URI to include that parameter ID. We change the context variable to a put, and then once that's done, we do exactly the same. We pull down the content of all the cluster-wide properties and we send it back. Now, there's no caching in this. There's no confirmation buttons when you hit delete or something like that. But this is just an example to show you how powerfully you can use RESTman to build your own UI on something, right? So yeah, that is the first sample. The second sample is kind of two-pronged. So if I go back here, one of the things we often find less experienced customers complaining about is that trusted certificates have expired and they didn't know. Right now, you can get those messages, you can have them in the log file, etc. But sometimes seeing it in a display with a red blob is actually the way forward. So this policy is built in a very similar way. If I go into this policy, you should be able to see. It's just a lot simpler because right now this policy is read only. Sorry, was that a question?
It's Robert who forgot to put himself on mute.
Bill, do you think you could mute Robert? Unless he's got a question. So yeah, very similar policy. It requires HTTP basic. It is building the web page in the same way, and but it's just a little bit. It's a little bit simpler in how it does that because we're only doing a get. So again, we set the RESTman URI, we set the action, and we go off and get them. But as anyone that's used RESTman knows, the trusted certificate entity doesn't actually return everything about the certificate. So for each of the certificates that comes back, we actually use the we get out the information we want about trust anchors, verify host, and then we extract the attributes from the certificate. And if I hover over that, you'll see just how much we get from the certificate. The thing we really want is the expiry date. So what we do then is just a simple comparison. If the expiry date is in the past, then we build a bit of HTML with a red blob in it. If not, we build HTML with a green blob in it. And then, after we've done that, we build it all together and put it in the web page. There's a couple of little evaluate regular expression here that are basically changing the word false to a nice green tick or a red X, but there's nothing in there really other than that RESTman call and then the extract certificate object. So kind of useful as a display, but what you really want is notification. So what I've done with that as well is change it into a scheduled task. So you'll see here I've got a policy. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, I created a policy of this type, and I set it to a background task. So I built that policy, and then I imported the code that you'll see in the policy in a second, which is in here. So it's just a cut down version of the previous policy that you saw. And rather than build HTML, it just sends an email out when you hit an expired certificate. So, fairly simple policy. Again, it's doing a RESTman call, and then it's going through getting the information we need. Although technically we don't need all this. I could delete that out. It's getting the certificate's expiry date from the actual certificate, And then if it's in the past, it's sending out an email. So all I did was create a scheduled task called Cert Checker, as you can see if I open this up, and I'm running that every 15 minutes. Now, in reality, 15 minutes is ridiculously excessive for certificates, I would think, in most environments, but I wanted to make sure I had some emails to prove this thing was working, and it's still working. So, here, maybe you can see, every 15 minutes I'm getting an email telling me that this certificate expired in 2017, which is kind of alarming that I've not dealt with it before, but that's the purpose of the demo. So, it's the same idea, it's the same concept that we're using for displaying the certificates. We're just taking it, twisting it into a into a scheduled task to check those trusted certificates and, notifying. It could be putting something on a dashboard, it could be doing whatever you want. So I saw there was a question, I think it was about, are we sharing the download place for the policy? So Philip, the first policy I've uploaded to our community GitHub, which was the first thing that I showed. So if you go into sample policies, this cluster-wide property manager is there, and you can see the policy as you'd expect. So you can download that and import that. The other two examples I showed, I will be sharing later today when I when I get time to get on GitHub. Now my access is sorted. We should be good. And Jay, I think if you've got anything that's not on GitHub, you'll be able to put that there as well, right?
Actually, all my stuff is already up on GitHub, but
okay,
we'll be sending updates in a moment.
Well, Greg Thompson and I didn't find out I didn't have access to GitHub properly until last night. So we sorted that this morning, and I will upload the other two later today. Any feedback or questions, feel free to shout on that. Jay, I guess that's a good time. I've shown my two, and I think you've got a couple of good examples to show as well. So I'll stop sharing and let you take over.
Yeah. All right. Boom. So, okay. In this, I'm going to show mainly this thing that I've been working on for a while called the Gateway Management Utilities. But first off, in the sample policies here, there is an updated RESTman policy, which does things a little bit better than the existing, the default RESTman policy. So you may want to download that and use that as your RESTman policy instead. It adds a few, just proper error handling and so on and so forth, and lots of internal documentation for those who need to go in and change things. The other place where my stuff has gone in the utilities, I've got two things that I was going to be showing today: the Gateway Management Utilities and the GMU Bundle Analyzer, if I have the time to get to it. So without further ado, the Gateway Management Utilities, which is distributed just as a bundle, deploys in this folder here, Gateway Management Utilities. And the heart of it is a whole bunch of fragments that take a call to RESTman and work a little bit of magic on them to do things like the get all policy XML, gets the policy object, but then massages it into a more digestible format. Things like list folders will do a list of all the folders from RESTman, but give you an XML object that, do I have? Yeah, it's a sorted list of folders. So what I found when I was building these utilities in policy back in the days of WSMan was getting a list of the folders if I wanted to display it for navigation purposes, et cetera, this really became helpful. So, and there's a whole bunch of different, utilities in here that simply make the XML that comes out of a RESTman call more digestible. To work with those, I've got 4 different services at the moment, 3 of which are already published, and the 4th is the cluster-wide property manager, where I'm taking what Aaron has done and re-implementing it into the Gateway Management Utilities. the utility assertions tester is just a simple service that tests all of these different assertions. So I have also found it useful when I'm just going in to get a list of things, et cetera, et cetera. The dependency analyzer is definitely scratching an itch. We've shown this before in other sessions. I'll talk about that briefly. And yeah, getting reports on your certificates. Aaron built a tool for doing this, as he just demonstrated. And independently, I built a very similar tool, which is part of this, and I will show that as well. So going over to here, all of the utilities that are in this interface, the API GW folder, do share a session. So I'll go ahead and log in. Now, I'm in the Gateway Dependency Analyzer. I loaded this before the meeting today, and it does some heavy caching. Because, yeah, the first time that you log in, it can take a fair amount of time. But what the Dependency Analyzer does is it makes calls to RESTman to get all of the policies, in this case, and displays them up in a folder structure, which is quite useful. Now, for any one of these, I can click on it. It will go through, takes it a moment, and come back with who is actually using this. So oftentimes, this is something that when people are working with the gateway, it's like, okay, I want to get rid of something, but what am I affecting? Or I want to change something, what am I affecting? Who depends on me? We've always been able to find, what something depends on, but the inverse of that relationship has been a challenge. So this is a tool that I built last year that goes through in a reasonable, easy to use UI, tells you can go in and select something, for example, a private key, who's using this private key. It's just gone through and checked all of the policies. Here we go. So this object was referenced by a service, the JWK Grok, and this one in this case tells me the names of the assertions in the Layer7 XML element lingo. So most of the objects are covered by this tool. There are a couple that I've missed. Recently, there was a place where private key was used, actually, that I discovered. I was not checking for it and added that into it. So the dependency analyzer comes as part of this gateway management utilities and is a great demonstration of how these various assertions can be used if you're planning to build your own tools using these kinds of assertions. I've been using them for several things. Now, unlike Aaron, I don't have fancy XML or HTML around my utilities here. I'm a little bit more function oriented. Okay. The utility assertion tester just basically says, make a call to that thing and give me all of the folders. So here's what I said when I said that these utilities will give you something that's really just more digestible. This is a lot easier to read. It doesn't have namespace. It's quick and dirty. It's already got the folders sorted. It gives you the path to the folders, both in terms of the names, as well as, for example, the ID path, which is each folder along here's actual ID if we need to make, work our way backwards down them. It gives you information that I have found useful over the years to have. Finally, the certificate report. So certainly not as pretty as what Aaron's done, but it goes through. It does not tell you what a certificate has been selected for. I did not add that to it, but it does give you subject, issuer, serial number, when it expires, and most importantly, how much time is remaining on it. It also looks at the certificates associated with the private keys that we've got in the gateway, because if a certificate for a private key is about to expire and you don't know it, all of a sudden your signatures can go invalid on you. Also, what's different here is if it's yellow, that means that the certificate will expire in less than 30 days, because frankly, if you get a warning about something that's already expired, you're probably in the weeds a bit. There's an info, there's a warning, and then there's a severe level where a certificate has actually expired. And this is a case where it tells me how long ago it even expired. Now, I don't have anything on this about scheduling a service, but we can also call it asking it to give me the format in JSON or in XML. And in the case of the JSON here, it tells me what my alert status is, so I don't even need to dig deep into it to find out is everything okay or not. In this case, I've got at least one certificate has expired, and here's the one that has expired. There's also, let's see, the warning and the infos of the other two. And this information is also carried in the XML response headers. So if one is calling this service, they don't even need to go in and parse the XML or the JSON. They can just take a look at these headers to determine whether they need to dig into something deeper. So it's oriented at being something called by a scheduled thing outside of the gateway to say, yeah, we've got a problem coming up with our certificates, both in the trusted certificates and the private keys. Any questions at this point? Okay.
Yeah. I just actually put one in actually. But have you thought about making it so it checks the actual site certificate? That is actually out there in the wild, and just checking that it's different. Obviously, you can't guarantee that is the one on the site is correct, but at least you could give a warning then and say, hey, this has changed. Like somebody introduces a new SAN onto the certificate, so the ID changes. Yeah, so your serial number changes. So then that happens a lot with Rapid SSL and a lot of these new companies that all the companies share a certificate, and they just put separate SANs in there.
Vince, are you saying like the scenario where you build something, it's making a call, and then Facebook or whatever changes their cert, so the one you're trusting doesn't work?
Exactly. Because then I think our product does that. It actually checks and it warns you that it's different to what it actually is receiving by checking externally.
Yeah, this doesn't go into any detail about what other people are doing. This is only telling us about the certificates that we've got.
Yeah.
In terms of expiration.
We find that so many customers actually have the situation where these certificates are changing. Sometimes several times a day they can change. Yeah. Wow. So some of the back end certificates, because a lot of the companies are using like not free certificates but the cheap ones, which and they have to update things, or they add new sites to their wildcard certificate, for instance. And so there's a new SAN on it or something like that, and it's just
So for us, I would say that you can trust the signing certificate, the certificate that signs those backend client certs, or you can trust a client cert. What's it called? Like a certificate pinning, where you have an explicit trust relationship to a cert, and that tends to add some management headache on the layer 7 gateway, I would say, when you have like an explicit certificate reference pinning for the reason that you're talking about, right? Sometimes
yeah, that's the thing. Most people actually pin certificates, the actual certificate itself. And when you got that pinning, if the certificate changes because of company change, something slightly different, because of your certificate provider says, oh, you still got a valid certificate, but obviously it's changed because there's a new SAN on it, jammed on the end of it or something. And that's when we see issues. So what we actually do is actually check and give a warning and send a warning out to say, hey, certificate you're actually trusting is not what it actually is in live at the moment, look at it and make your own decision.
That more at the policy level, Vince, because you trust the certificate, but you don't necessarily tell it what URL you're trusting it from. So would that not be more at the policy level to check your HTTP routing assertion and checking?
Well, I think that's what our gateway manager does. It actually goes and it checks. It actually goes out to the same URL, checks it, and then compares it.
Okay, so yeah, I get it. Yep.
My only concern about this tool, if I may, is that not about the certificate itself, but about, like you were saying, Jay, all this processing, especially of the dependencies, is quite heavy on the gateway, isn't it? We have to be careful about it because it's XML parsing. Even if it is cached, you are XML parsing like hell through the different.
That first load is definitely heavy on the gateway. But yeah, you know, I build things in the policy language, and this kind of stuff, I would not anticipate somebody to be running something like this in a production environment. You know, by the time you've gotten up to production, if you're looking to do something to find dependencies, you should have another environment that will tell you that. If not, you need to rethink how you're doing stuff.
Yeah, because that's another thing that I have seen as well, because I created something similar, if you remember, but only for the policies and services to see the dependencies of policies,
right?
And encapsulated assertions, and it was quite heavy. And then you know, the Apida came with the AAGM and they said, well, we're gonna kind of off box to the AGM, and the AGM will do the whole churning through the dependencies of JDBC and what have you, in order indeed to remove all that calculation that you require in order to do this, to check where the dependency is used. But yeah, I would say indeed, Jay, that one thing to say is don't do it in production.
Definitely not. I kind of thought that went without saying.
Just remember, this is really about how RESTman can be used, and you know, some of these tools have been built just because, you know, we wanted to do some things, and some are to give people ideas of how they can, you know, start to automate things, do more things with without going into policy management, that kind of stuff. So yeah,
kind of proof of concepts and things like that, right?
Well, like I said, some of these things, like the cluster-wide property manager, that was deployed in production with some access control around it for people to be able to change things on the fly that they needed to for business logic. So it's not one size fits all, Mauricio. It's really, you know, a set of ideas. But yeah,
something like the policy the cluster-wide property manager or the certificate report, those should be fine in a production environment. But a dependency analyzer that's going to, I mean, it's heavy. It's doing a lot of stuff that I would not be putting in production. But yeah, your other tools, sure, why not?
Shall we send it to Intesa?
Maybe.
Let's move on. Jay, have you got any more to show, or should we let Frank?
Yeah, the last thing I'm going to show is this bundle analyzer that I have. So oftentimes I'm sent a bundle, and this is not using RESTman per se. Let's see, I got 1993. Yeah. So the bundle analyzer is a command line shell utility. It uses the there is an XPath application that is command line oriented, and what I'm doing right now is just running it through the analysis of this bundle file, and it's, you know, going through looking for the you know, how to call the XPath utility, loading all the items from the bundle. Now it's gone through, found the cluster host name, determining the number of folders, finding all of the policies. As soon as this will take another moment. And eventually this delivers up a report that gives me the structure of what is in the bundle. And I'm finding this whenever I get bundles delivered to me for some troubleshooting application, to be very useful just to get a quick snapshot of what is in here. So if you're doing anything with bundle files and need to troubleshoot them, this is a very useful utility I'm finding. And this is also available on the community GitHub.
You could have chosen a slightly smaller bundle than 200,000 lines.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Anyway, here we go. This is almost done. So here comes all of the statistics, a list of all of the policies and all of the things that it found, including their ID, in case I need to go and do some mapping. I can take the output of this and determine, you know, what my ID mapping might be. And finally, yeah, we have a lot of stuff. Almost there. There we go. And then here's the tree of everything that is in that bundle. And that's all flying by pretty quickly, but now we're done. And here we can see, you know, the path to a policy and an associated encapsulated assertion that depends on it. And without further ado, I will hand it back over to, I guess, Francois at this point, unless there are any questions.
Thanks, Jay. Okay. I'm gonna try sharing here. Wait a second, maybe I should close this first. That slide somewhere. Yeah, okay. Share screen. Share. Slideshow. Yeah, so what I was going to show you today is that RESTman is evolving, right? So it's evolving in the sense that we're adding on top of it. So I'm going to show you some of the stuff we're working on. So we did a POC with a new path to retrieve configuration data. We're focusing on delivering incremental value along the way. We're focusing on providing more readability and more performance. There's something called Layer7 IAM that's also in the works that relates to this. And L7 IAM is also going to be helped by the improvements that we are making in RESTman. So basically, I'm going to demo a couple of things that are coming down the pipe. Let me switch to Postman. So RESTman plus, right? So if you look at RESTman bundle today, if I get a full bundle for, you know, an average gateway, you know, it takes anywhere between, you know, 3 to 10 seconds. I get, you know, all the information in this XML content. The API has a bunch of, you know, Boolean parameters that allows you to control what comes back. So the first endpoint that we worked on using this new path to retrieve data is this concept of summary. And Maurizio, you were asking a question in the chat earlier about, you know, can I get it kind of sounded like a summary. It's not exactly what you're asking for, but this is a really, really efficient call. And it basically goes through all the entities that you have on the gateway, starting with the policy trees, right? So the policy tree would show you, okay, this is the root path. I've got policies, I've got services, and I've got subfolders. And then, you know, this is structured in a way that is following the folder structure that the administrator created on the gateway. So we give you the name, but we give you a little bit more, right? So we'll give you, for example, the resolution path, and we'll give you this concept of checksum, which is a calculation for the contents of that entity that excludes references to local object IDs. So the idea is that I can compare changes now. I not only do I get a list, but I can say, hey, what's changed since 2 weeks ago, right? I can take these two JSON files, do a diff, and right away you know, if something's new, it will show you the diff. This service is new. But if the service changed, it will show you the checkpoint that's changed, right? So it's very helpful way to determine a diff between two environments in time, or two environments in like literally two different environments, like a staging pre-prod or something like that. Any questions on that?
No, that is quite in line with what I thought. I mean, not exactly. What I was wondering if there was a possibility of just simply, you know, when it was mostly for the policies and services. You know, when you do like a /services or /policies, and you don't want to have like the whole bundle, the whole XML of the policy, but you just wanted to know what there is as an entity. You know, pretty much what you're showing here, actually. You know, just the name, a couple of things. What I was thinking was a little bit more verbose in the sense that, you know, all the part that is above, before the element policy, let's say. Because the element policy has got the whole policy in there, but before that you have like indeed the resolution path, the ID, possibly the methods and things like that. So those things that, but this one is good as well. I mean,
so this is really about
nicely.
Getting a summary of your current configuration as a whole, right? But I think what you're asking more is a great segue to the next thing I was going to show you.
I think it's perfect, Francois. I was just about to say that. I think that question, it's as if we've
sounds like you're going towards GraphQL.
Yeah, exactly, right? So
GraphQL
/RESTman/2.0/graph, right? So here I'm saying, give me all the trusted cert, right? But maybe I want, is it a GUID or a GUID? Let me just try GUID. No, it's GUID.
Or maybe it's GOID, G-O-I-D.
Right?
It used to be.
Yeah. So I want a GUID.
Oh, it is.
Right? This certificate is big, right? I don't want all this information, right?
That's really cool. That is nice. Yeah.
So, and this is not something that calls RESTman 1 behind the scenes, right? This is a new going straight to the entity in the object model. It's extremely efficient. So yeah, we do this right now for trusted certificates, or you can say, get this single certificate, right? So I want this certificate. So you can pass, you know, on the GraphQL query some variables. Now I just get that certificate, but the same thing applies here. We can get combined entities. I want a call where I'm going to get the certificates and the cluster properties in one call, and GraphQL it's just easy to do that in GraphQL, right? So you got the trusted certs, the cluster properties, right? So excuse me, to set stuff, right? You've got GraphQL mutation. So GraphQL mutation, I want to set this variable that doesn't exist. So I do this.
It's basically a response payload specification, yeah?
Yeah, so now I'm getting, on the gateway side, it just created a new GUID for that cluster property. And I'm asking for it in the response, right? Because that might be relevant for me in my next step. But it's one call, set cluster property. If I say set Maurizio again, right? It's the same property. We just updated it now. It's just smart about stuff like that.
Nice. So it recognizes that entity has the same name, and so instead of telling you just sillily, oh, it already exists, it updates.
That's right. So in the, you know, each entity type on the gateway has different rules about uniqueness. In the case of cluster property, you can't have two properties with the same name. So we just like piggyback on that concept, right? So certificates work a little bit different because you want to be able to have two versions of their certificate, the one that's about to expire and the new one, they should have the same subject DN, but they have to have two different thumbprints. So then we enforce a uniqueness based on that, and the API reflects that. So the same way that I'm combining entities, in a GraphQL query, I can combine them in a mutation moving forward. So that would allow you to, it creates the GraphQL version, if you want, of what today would be a bundle where you're bundling different entities together. We can do that in a GraphQL mutation.
Can I just be a devil's advocate here and just mention? I love the idea that the post is an intelligence post that enables you to know that if it exists, you might want to update. But some people might discuss that, about the idempotency of post against put, and say, well, if I'm going to do a post, I do expect to create something that is not there. And so if I am going to create, some sort of client that does a post, I want the client to fail if the entity exists already, because RESTment is intelligent, but my client might not be, kind of thing, and they might say, I am relying on the fact that because I'm doing a post of something that already exists, because of the idempotency property of, or lack thereof, of post, it should fail.
Yeah.
I'm just
in terms of the direction we're going, we're thinking that in the future we would like to have a more declarative model, right? Where, especially for ephemeral gateways, a model where, the configuration as a whole is confirmed to work before you move forward, right? So that's one thing I would say about that. And also to your previous comment about the analysis that Jay was showing, right? You could argue, why would the gateway have that intelligence? Why can't you just take the whole configuration and analyze it outside the gateway, right? I think that's what sometimes the reaction is, right? And it's, when it comes down to it, is that, like a development gateway is a tool that's outside the gateway, right? And using things like RESTman 1, using things like we're adding capabilities, right? RESTman 1 already has the ability to do the kind of migration that you're talking about, where, I'm saying new or existing, or, like this concept has been, and we're trying to introduce new ways of interactive configuration with a different philosophy, because maybe people have different ways that they want to deal with configuration. So that's, I think, part of it.
Speaking of which, quick question regarding migration and new or existing. I noticed, and I don't know if anybody else on the call noticed, if you are going, say, I have created like a bundle that is using, say, OAuth, because I have require OTK OAuth to token, or OTK require OAuth to token, the assertion, it's going to pull out when I'm migrating out. I'm going to get a bundle that has also certain dependency related to the solution kit of OAuth. If I'm going to do a migrate in or a put of the bundle on a target that has that solution kit, what I have noticed is that even if you put new or existing for the policies that are OTK, it will fail, saying that the entity cannot be updated, although it's new or existing, which means it doesn't need to update it. But because, when you install the solution pack, the solution kit, those policies are immutable. There is like a checkbox that says that it's immutable, so you cannot change them yourself. When you do a migrate in and you are so in other words, you have to force it to be ignored. But then you don't know how many, especially when you are talking about MAG or OTK, you have a huge amount of policies that you would need to ignore. And
Maurizio, sorry to interrupt, Maurizio. It's a really long question, and I don't think the answer is going to be that short. I just want to open up for anybody else that have got questions, because I'm not saying you've reached your limit, but you've asked a lot, and maybe we should take that one offline, and just see before people have to hang up or drop off, if anyone else has got any questions or any feedback. There's a bit of a comment here about asking about RESTman and GraphQL. And it may cause confusion for new adopters. I think that's something we're very aware of internally. Anybody else got any comments or questions around anything they've seen, or specifically what Francois has shown with possibly RESTman evolving into a GraphQL API?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in anybody that looks at this and say, holy cow, this is too big a jump for me. I probably wouldn't use a GraphQL API to interact with configuration. If you have that reaction, I'd love to hear that, because it matters to us, and it's still really early on our side.
Yeah, the GraphQL is a welcome enhancement. Hey guys, Bhanu here. Is a welcome enhancement, right? This is the first time Gateway out of the box is supporting GraphQL, so it is excellent that we've chosen to go in that direction. There are several customers who use RESTman, and as long as we keep the features that are there and only add features, right? I don't see any problem, because RESTman on its own has existed for a while, and it has a learning curve, and a lot of people have learned it and are good at using it, right? We don't want to remove features. Yeah, this is excellent. I like it that GraphQL is available.
That's great feedback. An important point, right, Francois? We've already said RESTman 1 is going nowhere. There's too many people with too many investments in that. When we say that, maybe in 10 years' time, there's something else that replaces GraphQL. But yeah, right now we're not planning on taking RESTman 1 capabilities in any form and removing or reducing those. So yeah, and what we plan to do is, one of the things with RESTman 1, I think people like Jay, who've worked with it for years, understand it and really know it well. And we can do a much better job as we add more value to RESTman, maybe in the GraphQL format. We can do a much better job of education and sample policies and postman collections and that kind of stuff. So if you've got thoughts about how we can best assist you and your customers in for our partners on the call in doing that, we'd love to hear. If it's postman collections, I'm all for doing that. If it's other things we can do, we'll be putting videos on IMS Academy and that kind of stuff. We want to make sure we do that. Cool. I see almost a thumbs up, definitely from Humphrey.
Yeah, and are we going to add the RESTman documentation to the main documentation without having to publish the RESTman?
Yeah, do you know what? I was thinking that as I said it. I'm going to speak to Amog first of all about getting rid of the touch in the documentation, the error in that command, and I don't see why we couldn't put that main page and the schema in our default documentation. But let me speak to Amog about that. I think it would be great even finding it, right? You kind of go into the documentation and look for how to find the documentation on RESTman. So I think that's a great suggestion, and hopefully that's something we can solve quickly. For any RESTman additions we make, I'd like to do that as standard. So yeah.
Even if it's a shoot off, right? Even if it launches a different section, that is fine. But yeah, we don't want people to go do changes in order to look at documentation, right?
Yeah.
And you might never want to expose it as an external API, right? I mean, the examples, because Jay talked me through changing them this week, all our examples use the internal assertion. They don't actually make calls to it. So in that case, your documentation isn't even enabled. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. Philip and then Remco.
The other problem.
Sorry.
Okay. The other problem I have is the RESTman documentation requires a license to see.
Yep.
And that's a real pain when you're evaluating your product.
It doesn't really help.
Not being able to see how to run it. if I compare that with its competition, that's a weak point for you.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Yeah, you've got there's almost a vicious loop there that you've got to know how to expose it, and then to do that you've got to do it. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. We should solve that straight away if we can. I get your other point. You know, there are lots of other technologies we have to keep up with, and yeah, I think that's part of the API world. But you know, I think all we can do is make sure we keep as current as possible without going too far over the edge. And I think that's what Francois, you were asking, right? Is GraphQL just a step too far right now for people to consume? And the only way we can help with that is education and assets and things. So yeah.
If I may, my concern, I'm not against GraphQL. My concern is making sure that, you know, with RESTman 1, certainly, you know, per Banu's comments, we don't want to be deprecating things out of it, and we don't want that to go away anytime soon. But I think there are some incremental improvements we can put into RESTman 1 that should be a little bit higher priority than boiling the ocean with a whole new way of doing things. That's my own opinion. And RESTman 1 is most of the way there. It does a lot of stuff. It doesn't do some things very efficiently. And if we can just improve those efficiencies while not breaking it, I see that as lower hanging fruit than redoing the whole GraphQL thing and making it a whole new way of doing stuff. And I think our customers that are already entrenched in RESTman will appreciate that. Yeah, and that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think Francois summed it up with incremental value, Jay. Yeah. We don't just want to, you know, spin up something and it doesn't do everything. So yeah, look, we're at 5 past. Philip, you just put a message about, you know, strategic advice on CI/CD and policy plugin. We definitely see the incremental value in RESTman and things like the summary that Francois showed as a direction where CI/CD can become easier. You know, if the API is easier to use, easier to consume, and is designed to support those CI/CD use cases you've got, and you know, container gateways and being able to bootstrap configurations and stuff like that, I think we can do a lot of that. We are talking about policy plugin internally a lot at the moment to see whether those strategies support that or take us in a slightly different direction. So keep tuned for updates on that. But that's definitely one of the things we are trying to do. RESTman should also be the choice for CI. Yeah, so it's kind of similar comment from Sebastian. That's one of the design principles we're looking as we improve RESTman. You'll notice I'm not calling it RESTman plus or RESTman 2. You know, that decision is something we'll make as we progress it. But yeah, one of the design things for that is it should enable you guys to do CI/CD easier, right? And we want to do that. So yeah, great questions. I think we're 6 minutes over already. I don't want to keep anybody and stop it, get anyone in trouble for being late. I think it's been a great call. I thank Francois and Jay for their content and everybody for asking questions. If you have any questions or you have any, you know, deep feelings about this you want to share with our product team, right now is the time to interact with us, right? We are literally deciding these decisions yesterday, today, next week, and starting to do the development work. So if you want to reach out separately, please do. If you haven't got my contact details, well, if you haven't got my contact details, they'll be on the community site. You can connect through the community site for once the recording is uploaded by Bill in a little bit later time. So yeah, I will with that ask Bill to stop recording and thank everybody. Thanks for the feedback, everybody.